The John Locke Foundation has offered a critique of Governor Roy Cooper's clean energy plan. Our next guest has his own concerns about that plan and ideas about a better alternative. Peter Morcombe joins us now. And Peter, we're going to get to your alternative, but first of all, tell people why you know about this stuff. What's your background?
Well, I'm a physicist, and I spent 12 years working at Duke building the world's brightest gamma ray source. And around about the time of ClimateGate, I had more time on my hands, so I started to look at climate issues and energy generation as it relates to climate. And it started out just looking at data, but eventually I started to build my own climate models. And I have one that I think is pretty good. And it does say that carbon dioxide does have an effect on climate, but it's about 5 times smaller than the IPCC claims. And this is based on physics, not on what they call global circulation models, which are very shaky scientific foundation, in my opinion.
Well, in the attempt to address climate change, we see that Governor Cooper has come out with this clean energy plan. You've looked at it and you have multiple concerns about it.
Well, I think you need to look at the big picture. I mean, yesterday, Joe Biden asked leaders around the world to help in his fight against climate change. Totally unnecessary fight, I might add. But it's seen as a global phenomenon. When you add it all together, we're talking $5 trillion. And the North Carolina bit is a mere 100 million, a billion with a B. So we're only looking at a tiny part of the problem, but I thank John Locke Foundation for commissioning an excellent study and to spell out what you get for $100 billion.
You mentioned in a recent presentation about this that the Cooper plan would raise energy prices and would also leave us more vulnerable to something called an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse. So two bad things coming out of this plan.
Absolutely, and so it's you're wasting your money basically building stuff, windmills and solar panels that you'd be better off not building, and you would be far better off building small power supplies, power generating plants, rather than massive ones that we tend to build these days, so that the electrical generating power is located much closer to where it will be consumed. So you don't need the electrical high voltage grid to the extent we do today. And that makes you less vulnerable to attack or to a thing called global magnetic disturbance, which we suffered in 1859. If we had that GMD, the 1859 Carrington event, it would absolutely devastate the United States.
And that's because we rely so heavily on all of our electronics and electric material?
Exactly. We are the most dependent on the high voltage grid more than any other country, and because of our geographical size, that's part of it too. So it would pay us to build smaller power plants, lots of them and smaller.
And this really leads into the meat of the presentation that you gave recently, which was this alternative, something called SMR. What is an SMR and why is it something we should be looking at?
Well, small modular reactors, we're talking about nuclear reactors of advanced design that are going to be cheaper to build than nuclear reactors have ever been, and smaller, and they will be built underground. You won't even know they're there. You'll see some buildings, but it'll look just like an ordinary industrial buildings. And we already have a number of them being built around the world. None of them in the United States, I'm afraid.
One of the things people at the Locke Foundation and others who have studied a lot about energy don't have as much fear about nuclear power as some in the general public, but some in the public hear nuclear power and think, oh, there's a danger. Whether that's true or not with standard forms of nuclear power, the kind of thing that you're talking about is far different.
It's true, but before we the perception that nuclear power is dangerous is actually by far and away the safest way to generate electric power. because all the other waste kill people in mining accidents and all kinds of things, where nuclear power, when you work out the numbers, even with Chernobyl added in, is still the safest way to produce energy. And it's just that we have a fear of nuclear power, which we should have. It is dangerous. I personally am qualified in nuclear safety. I served on a university radiation safety committee for many years, so I'm very well aware of the dangers. But they are manageable, more manageable than the dangers with other forms of electrical generation.
And for the people who worry about a big plant like the one that we see at the Wake-Chatham County line or the other big plants, the SMRs that you're talking about look and operate a lot differently, don't they?
They do. They have amazing features that we never had before. We had them, but we decided not to. We gave up. We had a molten salt reactor in 1956. And we were trying to build a reactor that was small enough to power an airplane. And so you can see what we're talking about, a really small reactor. And it worked. And it was built at Oak Ridge in Tennessee. And some of the people who worked on that project are still alive.
One of the things that you mentioned a little bit earlier, and I want to get back to, is that some of these SMRs are being built, not being built, though, in the U.S. for the most part at this point. What do we need to do to start moving in that direction? Actually,
not much, because I was amazed when I started looking into who's designing small nuclear reactors. I found I'm sure I missed a few, but I found 58. And 12 of them are in the United States. So we are definitely participating. Now, we have special problems in the United States in that our regulatory system is very bureaucratic, and I'm pretty sure other countries will get into this quicker than we can. But we're getting in there. Right now we have one project license from a company called NuScale. That's a very small reactor, 77 megawatts electric. So the contracts have been written to build that thing. And we also have one from Bill Gates called Natrium. And that's a very advanced reactor. It's derived from one that was shut down in 1989 by Bill Clinton, but a good design all the same. And with Bill Gates behind it, if we don't build one here, we'll build one somewhere else, I'm sure.
But if we could fix the regulatory climate, this type of thing might become more common and a larger part of our energy picture?
Yeah, we're highly overregulated, and if you could just get rid of a lot of the bureaucracy, and a lot of good things could happen. But if we fail, I'm afraid the prosperity of our children is at risk, and also our security in terms of attack from other nations.
You had a chance to send me a slide presentation that you did on this, and one in particular that struck me had potential SMR benefits. And once again, we're talking about these small modular reactors, and you had safety, built-in factories that are shipped by trucks, the siting flexibility, lower capital cost. Sounds like there are a lot of good things about this that people ought to keep in mind.
Yeah, and the other thing is, even if you happen to believe that mitigating carbon is a good idea, they do a better job of it than building windmills and solar panels. I mean, it's a much better investment. Imagine if you build a solar plant now, you'll cause a lot of pollution right away, and the thing will wear out in 25 years. You spend the same amount of money on a nuclear plant, be it a small one or the SMRs that I'm talking about, they'll still be operating 80 years from now. So it's a much better investment.
We've talked mainly about how this helps with supplying energy and also cutting emissions, if you think cutting emissions is important. I referenced this earlier very briefly, but we haven't talked about this yet. How does something like an SMR help against the electromagnetic pulse or the Carrington event that you talked about?
Well, it's simply that being smaller, they can be located much nearer where the electricity will be consumed, which means that you don't need the high voltage electrical grid. The only man-made EMP attack happened when we exploded a 1 megaton bomb in the upper atmosphere, 800 kilometers from Hawaii. And you know what? It shut down street lights and a number of other things that happened. But it did not shut down the electrical grid because Hawaii doesn't have a high voltage electrical grid. And the electrical plants in Hawaii, there's none of them bigger than 500 megawatts. And that means that there's no point in Hawaii that's more than 35 miles from an electrical generator. You can imagine that doesn't apply to the United States as a whole, does it?
No, it sounds like dispersal is a key here, not having everything all tied in together.
Right, and because the low voltage electrical distribution is much less vulnerable to EMP or GMB, global magnetic disturbance, what it means, even if you did have part of it knocked out, most of the rest of it will keep going.
Okay, so as we wrap up, when people are watching this, what is the bottom line message that you want them to know about how we should proceed moving forward? I would guess one piece is don't go with the Cooper Clean Energy Plan.
Absolutely. I mean, these massive global projects have been going on since the time of the pharaohs. I mean, nobody's advocating building pyramids anymore, but these solar panels and windmills are the modern equivalent of pyramids. People, generations from now, will wonder why on earth we did that. It didn't make any sense. But we have a lot of people around the world want to do that. It's a massive waste of resources. But it will keep people busy building stuff, won't it?
Certainly will. If people want to learn more about this, is there an online resource they should look at, or can they contact you? What would you suggest for people who want to learn more?
Well, there are plenty of people very well organized. There's a number of very prominent scientists like William Happer. There's even the gentleman who started Greenpeace is a brilliant speaker on this subject, and he's pointing out that we're going entirely in the wrong direction, building things that shouldn't be built.
Well, it's a very important topic, and as you mentioned before, it has a major impact on our children and grandchildren, how we address these issues. Peter Morcombe, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, sir.